So Kavinya and I met when you were working at Equality Now.
Yes.
And SOAR, SOAWR. So I will leave you to explain what SOAWR is. And what your work at Equality Now was all about.
Okay, so after Urgent Action Fund, I actually did a brief stint at Akili Dada and then moved on to Equality Now, where I was doing work coordinating the SOA Coalition. And SOA is the Solidarity for African Women's Rights Coalition. It's currently 50 organizations working in 24 African countries to really get African states or African governments to ratify, domesticate, and fully implement the AU Women's Rights Protocol, which is the most progressive, legally binding treaty that we have on women's rights in the world. And I think it's something that we should be proud of, that is a product of this continent, because it is an absolutely fantastic articulation of women's rights vis-a-vis state obligations.
Yeah. And in terms of an instrument like this, a legal treaty like this being domesticated, because we hear words about ratification and adoption and domestication. And I know it's a kind of a pathway from adoption to domestication, which I don't think we have the time to go into right now. But very briefly, can you share with us, how would you describe a country as being in the state of domesticating? What does domesticating mean?
Okay, so basically when you ratify or accede to a document, it's when your government has signed onto it, the relevant government representative, and this signals the intention of the state to be bound, by the provisions that are in the treaty or the legally binding instrument. Then when we talk about domestication, it is the process of taking this treaty and making it have meaning within the domestic context. And this now, without getting into too much legalese, our countries have different legal systems that allow for the domestication process to take place. So you may have a country like Kenya, which is a monist state, which by virtue of, say, a constitution or another law, allows for any treaties that have been ratified or acceded to, say at the AU or at the UN level, to immediately form part of the laws of the country. Normally you don't need another process. They automatically form part of the laws of the country, usually. When now you have to, but there's also what we call dualist states, which mean that you need to take an extra step domestically to ensure that this treaty that you have ratified, either at the AU or UN level, has or finds meaning within the domestic context. And that might be a gazette notice, it could be having another law. Different countries have different methods of doing this. So essentially it's just trying and bring this treaty, which may seem very far away, closer to the citizen in terms of ensuring that there is a legal framework within which the citizens for whom it is envisioned are able to actually access those rights, at least from a legal, theoretical kind of standpoint, because we also know that, and this is why I talked about what SOA does in terms of ratification, domestication, and then implementation. Because now for tangible realization of these rights, there are extra steps that governments need to do beyond that domesticating process, which, as again, for me, in my understanding, is a very legal, technical process. You may have this on your law books, it may have effect in your country based on the legal process that you undergo in terms of the domestication. But it is another question altogether as to whether the people for whom this treaty is being acceded to actually tangibly access those rights. And that is now where implementation comes in, and there are different steps that the government can take to ensure that that implementation takes place, including, of course, working in conjunction with civil society. And of course, we know that civil society entities are also working very hard to ensure that citizens access their rights in different ways. Yeah.
Excellent. So when we come back, and to hear a little bit more about the work that you did on the protocol to the Charter on African. The long name is the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa.
Yes, excellent.
We prefer to just call it the Maputo Protocol.
Yeah.
You need less air to say that. So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about that, and let's find out. So we have a progressive treaty. It's like the most progressive in the world on the issues of women's rights, women's empowerment, gender equality. How are we doing? We'll be back.